In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the pressure is on. Disney is under the gun to respond to Comcast's $65 billion bid for 21st Century Fox. Following the green light for AT&T Time Warner, what is the appetite for more media M&A in 2018? Plus, the CEO of the payments company Funding Circle outlines their IPO aspirations after a string of massive public debuts. And the border wall between the U.S. and Mexico was the centerpiece of Trump's presidential campaign. As the administration now moves to build a wall, could new technology eliminate the need for it? But first to our top story. In the high-stakes poker game to buy 21st Century Fox assets, Comcast has just upped the pot. Comcast has made an all-cash $64 billion offer, topping the $52 billion equity deal that Disney had ponied up. So, are we looking at an all-out bidding war for Fox? MoffettNathanson's senior analyst Craig Moffett sure seems to think so. Take a listen to him earlier on Bloomberg Television.
It's almost certainly just the beginning. There was some expectation that Comcast would come in with a sort of shock and awe bid, if you will. They didn't do that. My sense is that they don't want to bid against themselves here, and they'll wait for Disney to make the next move, and then they'll decide how high they really want to go.
So, just who will win the rights to Bart Simpson, FX Network, and more? To get an answer on that, I want to get to New York, where Amy Young, Macquarie Capital analyst and Bloomberg media reporter Jerry Smith are standing by. So, Amy, what is the next move, assuming it is Disney's next move?
I do think that Fox obviously has to take a good look at this. I think Comcast does make a point in saying that they don't want to be rejected, since they are offering a pretty healthy premium here. It's an all-cash deal. They're obviously making a lot of different concessions and even offering a regulatory breakup fee. So I do think that they don't want to be rejected, and I do think that that Fox does have to listen to an all-cash premium deal.
So about a month ago, Disney CEO Bob Iger was on Bloomberg Television. He was asked about the potential of a Comcast bid. He said he thinks Disney has a better shot of passing regulatory approval. And then he said this. Take a listen.
I think if you then look at that versus another offer, whatever that is, either in terms of money or in terms of its source, you have to hold that up against our offer, not again just on value, but against the real possibility of it happening. And we believe that we're offering shareholders for both companies an outstandingly positive or attractive proposition.
Now that we know the terms of the Comcast offer, Jerry, which one is more attractive?
Well, I think, the big thing to look for is what's going on in Washington. I mean, this week we just saw a judge really give AT&T a total victory in its case against the government. So now you're thinking about Comcast potentially trying to buy Fox. I mean, this is similar to the AT&T Time Warner deal. It's a distributor looking to buy content. And that would, in some cases, potentially create some regulatory concerns. However, as we've just seen, the AT&T deal go through. So maybe what had given Fox investors pause about the Comcast offer, they may now have a little bit more confidence.
Amy, do you think regulators would favor one deal over another?
I think this is a tough call to make. Obviously, AT&T Time Warner was a vertical deal, but the fact that Comcast probably has broadband, it does have NBC, there's both horizontal and vertical elements here that could actually complicate things. But I think they've been really clear that they're willing to divest things like even Hulu and really try to get this pushed through DC.
Jerry, what do you think Disney's move will be next? They do have, I believe, the clock doesn't start ticking for another 5 days. What happens then?
Well, yeah, I mean, Disney would have 5 days to come up with a new offer. I mean, if you think about what Disney has said, I mean, they are looking to really take on Netflix. I mean, they are very much staking their future on building a direct-to-consumer service. And I think that they look at the Fox assets and FX and National Geographic and the studio as something that would really supercharge their plans going forward. So I'd be very surprised if they did not try to counter Comcast bid.
Amy, what does this signal in terms of future media M&A for this year, given that, we've seen that regulators can be favorable?
I think we're clearly in a get big environment, and if you are a free radical standalone company, it does seem like you need to respond and really try to think about a landscape that is shifting. And I think for a lot of these traditional media, cable, telecom companies, you are in a world where you're competing with Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. I mean, I think the list continues here, and it's unclear whether or not some of the FANG names actually would come in and maybe try and scoop up some of these traditional media assets.
So Comcast is also making an ambitious push in Europe for Sky. What does the future of a global Comcast look like?
I think their view is content travels globally, and they have a lot of different IP that does travel well, including parks, film that they've really gained a lot of success in. And for Sky, I think the controversy for U.S. investors is really, why do you want to gain more exposure to linear TV, which obviously has its own struggles. But I think they're taking a longer term view and saying they need global distribution, they can provide over-the-top services, and really leverage some of the content globally that they have, including sports.
So, Jerry, walk us through the process, as it stands now, 5 days. What happens next?
Yeah, so Disney would have, once Fox looks at the Comcast bid and decides whether it's a potentially superior bid to the Disney bid, Disney has 5 days to come back with its own offer. A lot of analysts and observers think that Disney will not only up its current offer, but also add a mix of cash and stock, and not just the previous all stock deal. Because one thing that Comcast has said is their deal is all cash. And then going forward, Comcast would have an opportunity to counter, and this could go back and forth, and this could be a bidding war that stretches out into the summer.
Amy, we're seeing a shakeup in the power dynamic between traditional cable companies and, the rising streaming companies. How does this impact that balance of power?
I think what you are seeing, and AT&T was very clear that their acquisition of Time Warner really was about Netflix and really expanding into mobile video and growing advertising. You are seeing sort of the incumbents really try and take on the disruptors in the space, and I think it goes to show you how quickly consumers are changing their media consumption patterns.
Now, Jerry, as a reminder, the two sides aren't vying for all of Fox, just the entertainment assets. But, what is Fox News and others will be part of another entity called New Fox. Tell us about the plans for that.
Yeah, I mean, what's not for sale of Rupert Murdoch's empire is Fox News, which is really the big money maker, and the Fox broadcast channel, as well as FS1, which is sort of their version of ESPN. So it's very much what's left of Fox is very much going to be a very sports-focused company. In fact, they've just won the rights to NFL Thursday Night Football. So this is going to be a very news and sports-focused company, which, given the way that the TV landscape's working, I mean, those are the two forms of programming that people still tune into live. So it is a shrewd move on Rupert's part to not put those assets up for sale.
That operation would be run by Lachlan Murdoch. Amy, how do you expect the personalities side of the equation to play out, on the Disney, Comcast, Fox side with James Murdoch, Bob Iger, Brian Roberts?
I mean, I think you're right. I think this makes M&A very complex because you're dealing with big personalities and obviously a lot of family ownership and generational, wealth planning here, and that obviously complicates things. But I would say for Comcast, they really have done a good job at really steering their M&A in a way that corporate governance hasn't really been a big issue. And I do think that, the CEO Brian Roberts has done a good job at really appointing people to run different silos of the business, cable and NBC. And really actually taking a step back away from kind of being a family-run business, if you will.
Amy Young of Macquarie Capital and Jerry Smith, who covers media for Bloomberg, thank you both. All right, the parent company of Snapchat is making its first big foray into working with outside developers, putting privacy at the forefront. The company is releasing several new software development kits that let app makers build tools that can be integrated into Snapchat and used on their own apps. As part of the relationship, Snap said it won't share any personal data on users or their friends. Coming up, European fintech firm Funding Circle gives new details on when the company could go public. Highlights from our interview with CEO Samir Desai next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. London Tech Week is well underway with the biggest players in European tech in attendance. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde has been keeping up with all of the happenings, and she joins us now live from London. Caroline?
Yeah, Emily, it's been a fascinating week, and a big focus for London Tech Week has actually been talent, isn't it always? And the UK government actually announced it will offer new visas to immigrants wanting to start new businesses. It's in a bid to attract tech entrepreneurs and will lure those deterred by Brexit. Now, a company fully behind the government's focus on the sector is Funding Circle, one of the biggest UK startups. And its own lending activities have actually boosted economic activity, not just in the UK, but across Europe. I spoke with CEO Samir Desai about the impact his business is having.
What we found was, of the £1.7 billion of loans that we did last year, that actually created 75,000 new jobs globally, 45,000 of which were in the UK, and an additional £4 billion of economic value or incremental GDP. So it's really rewarding because we talk a lot about big numbers like billion this, billion that, but to see it really starting to feed into the real economy is something we're really excited about.
And you go feed into the real economy a little bit more because you're hiring more.
Yeah, so I mean, we as a business, it's not quite as high as 75,000 jobs, but we are hiring around 400 people this year, 200 of which will be in the UK, mainly in technology and data analytics, because really it's underneath it all, it's really a technology data business, analysing huge amounts of data to help connect up small businesses with investors. 200
in the UK, 200 outside of the UK. Talk to us about when you're hiring talent in this Brexit world in which we live. How hard is it finding the right talent to come to the United Kingdom? Is it easier in Germany, the Netherlands, US, where else you're based?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think if you look at the UK, that's where Funding Circle started. We've been here since 2010. We're one of the largest, one of the larger homegrown technology companies here. So we do probably, on balance, find it easier to hire, Brexit or no Brexit, than say markets like the US or Germany and Netherlands, where we're probably a bit less well known at the moment. So we certainly haven't seen as big an impact as maybe it's feeding in for much smaller companies, but certainly for us, we still see a lot of talent wanting to come and work with us and really try and build a better financial world.
That's got to be somewhat helped when the government shines a light on the ecosystem, as they have done this week. We're hearing from number 10, Theresa May, the Prime Minister, saying, look, more private capital coming to the tech ecosystem in the UK, more focus on visas, particularly for entrepreneurs. Is this mood music too little too late, or is actually a positive step?
No, I mean, I was at a round table today with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, the International Trade Secretary, Digital Minister, so, and they took, well over an hour out of their day when, we know that there's all sorts of Brexit votes going on in the House of Commons. And what it reinforced for me is that the deep commitment that the UK government has to technology here. London has been one of the fastest growing technology hubs in Europe. The government in particular has been very helpful to us. The British Business Bank actually started lending through Funding Circle in 2013 when our business was only 3 years old. So I actually think it's, obviously we hear about Macron this, Macron that all the time, but actually I do see a very high level of support in the UK, and it's great to see.
Macron this, Macron that. The French leader, of course, has been focusing an awful lot on AI investment in building up the French tech sector. And there was a piece of reporting coming out from, I think it was EY, consultants, showing that actually Paris is starting to steal the limelight in terms of investors thinking it's a better destination to go and put their money. Do you feel that in any way, that investors are now looking to rival hubs that little bit more, or not so much?
I mean, I think you will naturally have multiple hubs developing across Europe. Paris and London are probably as close as San Jose and San Francisco, so which all count as Silicon Valley. So, you know, whether it's Silicon Europe or whatever you want to call it. But I do think there are a lot of advantages for London. London is a very big city. Greater London is 10 million people. You have access to great universities. You have access to quite a large financial sector with all the depth of talent that is actually in that. So whilst I think there will be stuff on the margins, you know, we're certainly seeing this concentration. And you know, this roundtable I was at today, the CEO of DeepMind was there talking about how they have 1,000 people working there now, all from all over the world. Some of the you know, experts in artificial intelligence really congregating. So once you start to build these ecosystems, it is quite hard to break them.
You're potentially eyeing the market at some point to go public. Can you give us any update as to how that progresses, the banks involved, for example?
Well, we've not confirmed or denied that we're going to take Funding Circle public. What we have said is that we do want the business to be a public business in the long run. You know, at the heart of what we do, you know, we don't actually lend money ourselves. We're a platform connecting up thousands of different types of investors directly with small businesses, processing all that stuff. And that's a trust-based business. And eventually, we do think being a public business will help us with brand awareness, with trust. And at the end of the day, great companies do go public at some point. So I can't really give you an update or a non-update either way, but you know, it's something we have an aspiration to do at some point.
That was some of my conversation with the Funding Circle CEO, Samir Desai. And it really is interesting, Emily, that Samir is still clearly keen to go public. And it must be fueled his optimism in some way by the significant success we just saw of the other fintech European company going public just this week, which was Adyen.
Right, Adyen, Caroline, performing well out of the gate. That said, still a long ways off from the giants of financial services and fintech. Of course, Ant Financial raising money at $150 billion valuation. PayPal crossing $100 billion market cap. How ambitious are these UK fintech companies?
I think they are. I still think they realise that, yes, they're causing waves. Yes, everyone wants to talk about the success of fintech and the concerns that the banks have and the older players. But actually, there is still so more expansion for them. They've only just got the tip of the iceberg for a certain extent. I spoke to this about Samir. Have a listen.
It's incredibly exciting to see businesses like Adyen do really well. But actually, there's a very long way to go still in terms of penetration.
Still so much more loans to be given to the small and medium-sized enterprises compared to that of the banks at the moment. So I still feel that they've got plenty of market share to take in the UK, plenty more on your side of the coast, obviously in the United States where they have a presence, but still need to be beefing up, particularly in Germany and the Netherlands as well.
Now, while I have you, Caroline, I have to ask about this Comcast bid for Fox, which has new implications for the Comcast potential takeover of Sky. It adds a new twist, and Sky investors could benefit or not.
Yeah, it's really interesting as to whether or not this could actually push up the valuation for Sky, make a bit more of a bidding war for the asset here in the United Kingdom. There's something called the chain rule here in the United Kingdom, and it's something that regulators might force them to do because Comcast is already putting in a bid for Fox. Fox already owns about 39% of Sky. That therefore values Sky at more than £13 a share at the moment. Well, the bid from Comcast for Sky in and of itself is in the realms of £12.50 a share. So that could actually force them to have to drive up the overall bid for Sky. However, it also could muddy the waters because if you've got Disney and Comcast fighting for Fox and maybe then for Sky, maybe they just decide to divide them up, and maybe some take parts of Fox, some take parts of Sky, and actually decide that they're not going to have a bidding war at all. So the question is still how this will affect the value of Sky. At the moment, it trades above Comcast's original bid of £12.50, so many still there hoping that this could drive Sky ever higher. Emily.
Meantime, we are nearing the end of London Tech Week. What have been the standouts for you?
I think think the standout has been the commitment of the UK government to technology. That was a significant prize, £2.5 billion coming from private companies. Yes, it's coming from the likes of Salesforce and the likes of NTT in Japan, so it's not exactly all coming from the government itself, but there's a real commitment there to shine a light on the sector, and also a promise of so-called patient capital, £2.5 billion of investment, therefore, for the future to go into this particular sector. So despite Brexit taking up so much of our minds here in the United Kingdom, the government still has time to take stock, to stand back and actually talk about the sector and the success of the sector. So that was a real key point. It's also interesting, there's some great events going on, and today the Bank of England head, Mark Carney, was talking with none other than some of the fintech success stories that are out here, with Revolut and the like, which is founded by a Russian guy. So I think there's been some really interesting topics of conversation, and interestingly for you who wrote Brotopia, there's been plenty of talk about women within technology and how we can make diversity and inclusion a real focus.
Glad to hear it. Caroline Hyde in London for us. Thank you so much. Coming up, the city of Chicago is betting big on Elon Musk. Details on the Boring Company's newest project next. I'm Bloomberg Technology, live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Elon Musk's newest company has just gotten a big boost in legitimacy. Bloomberg has learned that the Boring Company is the winner in a bid to build a multi-billion-dollar high-speed express train to Chicago's O'Hare Airport. The company is trying to get ambitious transportation projects underway in LA and Washington as well. Sticking with Musk, he is betting that the run-up in Tesla shares isn't over. The CEO of the electric car maker has bought $25 million more of the stock. Tesla had risen about 14% since Musk bought $10 million worth of shares on May 7th. The company is cutting 3,000 jobs, roughly 9% of its workforce. And a Silicon Valley startup called Spin Launch will reveal the first details of its plans to build a machine meant to hurl rockets into space. That's right, space catapults. To achieve that goal, Spin Launch has secured $40 million from some top tech investors. Alphabet, Airbus, and Kleiner Perkins are all backing the company. The company remains tight-lipped about exactly how this contraption will work, although its name may give away the basic idea. Coming up, the debate around artificial intelligence continues to swirl around big tech and startups, all while industries like banking and retail spend billions on AI to transform the way they do business. So will the machines win out? We're going to discuss next. This is This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Amazon has been using robots in its warehouses for years. Now the company is using automation to transform what was considered a white-collar job. It is new software that predicts what shoppers want and how much to charge for it. Under an initiative called Hands Off the Wheel, the company shifted tasks like forecasting demand, ordering inventory, and negotiating prices to algorithms. It is the latest story highlighting how AI has transformed our world and our workforce. Joining us for more reaction to that and more, we're joined by Michal Katz, co-head of tech investment banking at RBC Capital Markets. Michal, thank you so much for joining us. How transformative do you think this application of AI at Amazon can be?
Thanks, Emily, and nice to be here. Look, the concept of AI has been around for some time. We're continuing to see evolutions and new iterations of it. These AI technologies, which are enhanced by the next iteration of deep learning, machine learning, are really being used to help automate every aspect of our world today. And so what Amazon is doing is taking it to the next level. There are questions that come with it, which is you have automation and what impact do they have, but I do view that we're going to continue to see additional applications across the board.
Do you think this could really transform Amazon's business?
Look, I believe it's going to make Amazon's business more efficient. You have technologies that, in essence, take away some of the repetitive, monotonous tasks that folks have been keeping their heads down doing, and now are able to use that time to advance, whether it be customer service or other more, I would say, advanced, higher level or value add applications.
When you look at Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, all of these companies have major artificial intelligence initiatives. Which one is the most compelling?
You know, it is interesting. I do think that when I look at artificial intelligence broadly being used to advance healthcare, to advance the wellness of our life, I find it to be incredibly compelling. Look, on a basic human level, on a personal basis, any application that can help automate, shorten a line where you wait at the supermarket, or whether it be helping you make a faster decision as to which physician to go visit. But when you really think about what do we care about, our welfare, wellness. So I do believe healthcare is one area where we've already seen. You haven't mentioned IBM and Watson and some of the applications that AI can help advance on that front.
Well, you know, with respect to IBM and Watson, of course, made a big splash, but there's criticism that, you know, the results have been slow to be seen. You know, what impact is Watson really having at scale?
Well, what AI is in essence allowing all of us to do is automate processes. And so when you're trying to identify a condition, you're trying to identify a potential remedy or a treatment, putting two heads together, or a machine and a human together, two are better than one. And so, yeah, advances are slow. I think we're in the early innings of AI, so early days, more to come.
So Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, has said this could be more transformative than, you know, the impact of fire on the human race. Are we at risk, though, of an AI hype cycle?
I don't think that we're at the risk, at a hype cycle just yet. I do think that there is an opportunity to actually be more proactive about the implications of AI, and we're beginning to see that. Organizations such as Google, who came under criticism for Project Maven, that was out there when they were collaborating with the Department of Defense on analyzing video footage from drones, had come under criticism. And so Google came out and put together principles for dealing with it. So I do believe we're in the early innings of AI, but it is not too early to think about the implications, not just in terms of workforce training and skills, but creating a framework which is which applications actually benefit society, which applications can you actually try to configure so they don't create bias, which applications are beneficial for us from scientific perspective. So while it is early days, it's not too early to think ahead as to how do we build a construct, principles, framework to make sure that AI is really benefiting broader society.
Google did come out with a whole set of ethical AI principles, as you say. When it comes to jobs, blue or white collar, what is the responsibility of tech companies like Amazon to consider that?
I think it is a responsibility of both the public and the private sector. So thinking about automation broadly and the type of jobs that will be in high demand, our education system, not just the formative education, but also ongoing education that's going to happen in the workplace. So there is a responsibility for us as a society to make sure that our upcoming workforce is well-trained, educated, agile, adaptive, because things will continue to change. If you're at the early inning, there is going to be a next evolution. Interestingly enough, I was at an event this morning where Jeff Weiner of LinkedIn was talking about some research they have done, which are the three most sought-after professions. And interestingly enough, shouldn't be surprised for this conversation, interpersonal skills, communications, collaboration. Digital fluency was the second one, and obviously computer science engineering was the third, as we're all looking for data scientists and folks that are versed with next generation AI and what have you.
So while I have you, given that you are the co-head of tech investment banking, I have to ask you about what's going on in the public markets. We've had some recent tech IPOs, direct listings. If you think about Spotify, if you think about Dropbox, we have this new news about Comcast making a bid for Fox, which could lead to a wave of media M&A. You know, what's your outlook for the rest of the year?
Well, we see continued activity across the board, whether it's IPOs, M&A dialogue, private placements, which is investments, IPOs had been one of the best performing asset classes, about 70% up from offer to current price. I think it's 35% on the first day. We've seen the M&A valuations. You mentioned some of the big ones, but we've seen others, whether it be from Salesforce acquiring MuleSoft, you've seen Microsoft acquiring GitHub, at very much high premium valuations. So with the deals, with the AT&T transaction out there, it clearly a view to have paved the way for further dialogue and potentially bigger deals on the horizon. And so outlook for the rest of the year, incredibly busy.
All right. Michal Katz, you got a lot of work to do. Co-head of Tech Investment Banking at RBC. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Emily.
Still ahead, Apple is close to a deal for an animated movie in its latest Hollywood push. That story ahead. This is Bloomberg. Despite tariffs that President Trump imposed on imported solar panels, the U.S. installed more solar energy than any other source of electricity in the first quarter. Developers installed 2.5 gigawatts of solar in the first quarter, up 13% from a year earlier. That accounted for 55% of all new generation, with solar panels beating new wind and natural gas turbines for a second straight quarter. Here to talk about the growing trend of solar power, we have Bill Gross, CEO of Edison Microgrids and founder and CEO of Idealab, the longest-running tech incubator. Bill, great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
So, despite these tariffs, there was a recent report that showed that corporations are still moving overwhelmingly towards solar. Do you expect that the Trump policies will hinder that?
Not at all. We are at a complete inflection point in renewable energy and solar energy in particular. For 2 decades, the price has been coming down, and it's finally competitive with fossil fuels without subsidies.
Even with the tariffs?
Even with the tariffs. So the tariffs are going to be a tiny speed bump into deployment. Things are happening in California alone. They just passed a bill to require every new construction residential home to have solar on the roof. That's going to add like 800 megawatts. And then around the world, solar is being deployed at a crazy rate just because of price.
And the fact that corporations are now doing this is huge because they consume huge amounts of energy.
Corporations use 2/3 of all the energy in the world. Residential is only 1/3. And corporations are concerned about the bottom line. They're concerned about making a statement for their employees. But now the CFO is happy because they can save money. Amazon is installing a new 1 million square foot warehouse, solar on it, every month, just for the last 12 months.
And yet the Trump administration has pulled out of the Paris Agreement, rolled back Obama-era regulations on power plant emissions, sweeping tax reform that are constraining financing on solar and wind.
Yeah.
How is that impacting the industry?
Well, the federal government has pulled out, but the states, cities, and corporations are stepping up. Again, because it makes economic sense. It used to be that you went solar for a moral reason. Now you can do it for an economic reason.
So what impact are these policies then having?
The policies maybe will slow down things from the dramatic growth of 30% growth to 20% growth. So still double-digit growth, but only a very small impact.
And what are you seeing around the world?
Oh, around the world, there are gargantuan projects going in. I don't know if you heard about the SoftBank deal for the Middle East.
Absolutely.
$200 billion they want to spend by 2030 to put renewable energy in. And that's being lifted everywhere. I mean, everyone is repeating that. It's really exciting times.
Speaking of the states, California law requires at least 50% of the state's electricity to come from clean energy sources by 2030.
Yes.
Your company created a big rooftop power plant in California, which you say is the largest to incorporate panel tracking systems that essentially turn with the sun and can be even more efficient. Talk to me about this.
Yes. Well, traditional solar panels, you put them on the roof or you put them on the ground, and they sit stationary. If you track them and face them toward the sun, you can get 30% more power. So the solar system on the roof right behind you, those are stationary panels. But if you rotate them and point them toward the sun, 30% more energy for only about 10% more cost. So we built the largest tracking solar installation on a rooftop on a Chiquita warehouse in Oxnard, California. That boosted the output enough to make it economic to beat the price of electricity for that system. So it's very exciting that now we can actually compete on economic terms.
So can and will this be done at scale?
Yes, this is going gangbusters. I mean, all over the world, everybody is looking, where can I deploy solar or wind and beat the price of fossil fuels? And right now, you can beat the price of fossil fuels when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. The next phase, the next 20 years, is about making it so we can do it 24 hours a day, adding storage. So we're not just limited to the times when the sun is out and when the wind is blowing.
So while I have you here, I do want to ask you, of course, about Idea Lab. You know, since 1990, you did a tech incubator before people did tech incubators, and you've since had 45 IPOs and acquisitions. You know, what's different now that everybody is doing that, and what's your value proposition?
Well, the world has changed so much in favor of entrepreneurship. I believe that entrepreneurship unlocks human capital, takes talent, and brings it forward to change the world in positive ways. So I just love to try and take people and help them become more entrepreneurial. And in our Idea Lab incubator, we brainstorm big ideas to solve technical problems in the world, and then we put teams together to go after them. And it's very, very exciting to see what's happened to entrepreneurship just in the last 20 years. It really is commonplace and transformative.
And Edison Microgrids came out of Idea Lab, as I understand it. Okay, Bill Gross, CEO of Edison Microgrids, founder of Idea Lab, thank you so much.
Thank you
for stopping by. All right, now Apple is taking its foray into Hollywood one step further with a right in feature films. This, according to people familiar with the matter, who say the company is near a deal to create an animated film. Joining us now from LA with the latest, our showbiz reporter, Anusha Sakua. Anusha, what do we know?
Well, we know that Apple has been in talks with the Irish animation studio Cartoon Saloon, and that is a quite well-known animation house that made films like Song of the Sea, Breadwinner, Sea of Kells, and that is it's received, you know, many Academy Award nominations for its films. It's considered very high caliber. So Apple's really getting in with a very high quality producer of content. So it kind of says something maybe to their ambition. We don't know exactly how the film will be distributed digitally. We know that Apple has been talking to people in Hollywood over the past couple of years. It's been hiring aggressively to build out a team to make content and buy content for streaming. But it's unclear if it's going to be maybe part of its Apple Music streaming service, although that seems unlikely given that it's an animated movie. You know, it bought a film, a documentary about Ed Sheeran, which would be part of its Apple Music subscription service. But we know that Apple wants to bring a slate of content out in 2019. So this film won't be ready for probably a year or more, so maybe this will fit into that, but we don't have that much clarity on the distribution, and that's the key question really, is what does Apple really have planned for distributing all this content? But this is its first feature film that we know of that it's got a deal for.
Quickly, Anusha, is there a sense that there is a shakeup to come in animated movies given the potential exit of John Lasseter, the co-founder of Pixar, from Disney?
You know, this weekend, actually, we've got The Incredibles 2, which is on track to do really well. And one category of film that is doing really well, but there is growing competition for, is in the animated section. And it's not a given. You know, Pixar has had flops, not very many, obviously. But, you know, Disney is in a weakened position without John Lasseter because he was a visionary. He was responsible for the resurrection of Disney animation, which came back to strength with Frozen. It had a bit of a checkered period of years before that, and he obviously led Pixar and that label. Now, you know, Disney's clearly in the works to bring up through its ranks to lead those two divisions, you know, leaders in their field, and you know, we'll see how that goes. But clearly, there's going to be some change there. But there's a lot of work going on in Hollywood in animation.
Anusha Sakui, thank you so much for bringing us that scoop.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Much more ahead, and a reminder, Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Well, the U.S.-Mexico border, over 1,500 miles of desert, rivers, ravines, and more. Building a wall across it has been a central promise of President Trump, but the president hasn't gotten his wall yet, amidst backlash, lack of funding, and of course the fact that it would be a logistical nightmare. If Palmer Luckey, the man who founded the VR startup Oculus has his way, he will give the president a wall, albeit a virtual one. His company, Anduril Industries, is trying to sell the government on using virtual reality as a solution to stopping people from illegally crossing the border. My next guest got an upfront look at Anduril and its new technology, wrote about it as part of his upcoming cover story for Wired magazine. Stephen Levy, Wired's editor-at-large, joins us from Seattle. Stephen, always great to have you here on the show. So you visited the border with Palmer Luckey. You put on the headset. Describe the experience for me and how this technology works.
Okay, first of all, the conditions for this were chosen because this was a place on the border where it's really difficult to have any security. It was a very remote area. There's not many Border Patrol officers who can get there in a hurry. And the rancher whose land it is told me that people just walk on with impunity, and there's been gun battles on his land, and he's very frustrated. This Anduril Industries uses low-cost, off-the-shelf technology, and they power it with AI and some virtual reality as an option, but you could do it without it. To put up these low-cost towers, they could see for miles, literally, and detect what's happening in the territory where people would be crossing the border, and it can distinguish between a cow and a person, say.
So it's an incredibly harsh environment, as I mentioned, wire-eating bugs, fierce winds, deep ravines. Every attempt to use technology at the border has basically failed. What makes you think this can succeed?
The problem with it before was that, for one thing, the technology wasn't there yet. You didn't have the low-cost sensors and really efficient AI that you have now. And Anduril has used it's an innovative technology. They've come up with a way to basically take a flash picture a mile away by using a laser, and then again using their thrifty methodology. They took it from a hair removal product, so they just repurposed a 600-watt laser to do that, so they can come up with it pretty cheaply. And in the few weeks it was done, it caught 55 people.
So how efficient is it, though, given that you still need officers and humans to catch these people, essentially?
I guess their strategy is to say, we don't have to do it all. You don't have to have automated robots to actually catch the people. In terrain like this, where it takes a few miles to cross, and then you have to go a number of miles to go to the next highway, there's time to give a few hours to Border Patrol people to take, say, a helicopter to get there. And this is only the beginning of Anduril's plans. They see the border as a way to open up their getting contracts for what they call the battlefield of the future. So their ultimate goal is to sell to the Department of Defense and become a defense company using Silicon Valley technology.
Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention the stories we've been hearing of the hundreds of migrant children in these holding centers who have been ripped away from their families as part of this new Trump immigration policy to prosecute border crossers and separate them from their children. You know, where are the families in all of this?
Well, the families are essentially not part of the Anduril thought process. They're fulfilling what the government wants done. They're not getting involved in the politics. And I point out in the story that what we've learned over the last year and earlier, but especially over the last year, is that technology is politics. So as much as Anduril says that they're doing a job and they consider themselves patriots doing work for the government, that you can't do this without dealing in some way with the implications of your technology.
On that note, we have to talk a little bit about Palmer Luckey, and his political views are antithetical to what most of Silicon Valley preaches. You know, he left Facebook in the midst of a lot of controversy after Mark Zuckerberg bought his company for $2 billion. Tell us a little bit more about him. This company is now only a year old, but, you know, talk to us about, you know, what's next.
Right. Well, Palmer is a very interesting figure. He's only 25 years old. He started this company, as you mentioned, Oculus, as a teenager. It got bought for a huge amount of money from Facebook. And I don't think he fit in well at Facebook. And I think maybe it was less of a politics thing, and Facebook insists that they didn't fire him because of his politics, then, you know, that he just wasn't a match. Facebook has a lot of people who come from Ivy League schools. Palmer was homeschooled and then went to a community college in Southern California, and I think the politics might have been a factor in his not fitting in, but I don't think I believe Mark Zuckerberg to say it wasn't politics which fired him. He is an upfront supporter of the Republican Party, but he told me that he is not a member of the alt-right.
Curious, since you are, of course, writing a book on Facebook. I just got back from E3, the biggest video game conference in the world. Facebook had a presence there, but, we were asking the question, is VR dead? I had CEOs telling me this is still a $0 billion business. Do you think that Facebook buying Oculus for $2 billion, especially given the fallout, was a mistake?
Well, they bought Oculus for a very long-term vision, which was to say in 10 years, virtual reality might be the platform of the future. Mark Zuckerberg still believes that could be the case. But I think if it doesn't work out that way, I don't think he's going to regret it because, their strategy is to look to the next thing and make sure that they're not cut off at the pass by a new paradigm coming along and like mobile came along and not being ahead of the game. So if it isn't VR, maybe it's blockchain. And guess what? Facebook is now working on the blockchain. So I think that anything that looms as the possible next platform, Facebook is going to be there.
All right. Wired Stephen Levy, thank you so much for joining us. Great story from you in Wired Magazine. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.